We are going to discuss shoes. So, shoes are pretty ubiquitous with society now, so it's not necessarily uh, surprising that what's more surprising is that we have feet underneath the shoes. And I think that's an interesting concept to remember is that underneath the technology is human. And I think you see a lot of our modern discourse around technology, phones, the internet, you know, weapons, etc. Is what is the humanity in terms of that lies underneath this. And so it's the core of the shoe is the foot. And if we lose that, we lose a lot of our what it means to be human. So shoes are valuable. Let's see. All right, so the history of shoes, and I promise most of this is pictures. It's not all boring things. I forgot to put a picture in this one, but anyways, and also I do need to apologize for the ugliness of this like blue and black. I got you duplicate the slide and you get all the way through and you're like, wait, this all looks so bland. I'll figure out a better background, but just ignore that for the time being. Shoes have long been used for a combination of as a tool, a status symbol, and ceremony. And what you have to remember is that the context of shoes is directly related to our human capacity to manipulate our environment. Meaning, at first, we only have plant and animal material. We have leather, we have, reeds, we have wood. There's different things that you can make shoes out of. But when you're limited to what you have access to, you know, it's not like there's plastic and flexible rubber and carbon fiber plates and different, foam material. Those aren't there. And so shoes are not, they're few and far between. And when you do have them, almost always they were a sign of some type of sacred ritual, ceremony, or some type of prestige, position of power. So you would wear these things as a sign that there's a sign of distinction. They weren't something you wore all the time to cover your body per se, though as technology did increase, there would be use of shoes as a tool in circumstances when the ground's incredibly hot or you need to be able to, navigate dangerous territory. But the point of that the simple point should at least open your mind to remember that even though our feet are generally soft and stiff and weak now, at some point we used our feet to be barefoot in almost all circumstances, which means that they have the capacity to be very tough, very dexterous, very mobile. And I think that I don't know necessarily how to get back to that full capacity after having worn shoes for a long time because there is a level of discomfort, there's a level of stimulus you have to be able to deal with. It's a lot, and there's a lot of tissue remodeling has to happen, and that isn't necessarily worth the squeeze, so to speak. The juice isn't worth the squeeze in many cases, but that doesn't mean that we can't make progress towards having healthy feet. But it is just a reminder that shoes exist as a part of the human story, not as necessary for humans. And what you see is as we have increased industrialization, people are moving to cities. We have, let's say, the change of human civilization required to have higher populations together. Um, in modern times, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, what that looked more like was in, steel plants, industrial factories, let's say a lot of machines, things that increase the leverage where it could be more dangerous for humans. But in general, what you want to think about is as you get a lot of people together, people eat a lot of food. They poop a lot. They have animals that they work with. Those animals poop a lot. Before you have this, the ability to bring water into the house and have some type of plumbing, which the flushing toilet is the greatest public health or technological invention in the history of humanity. Is just going to flush your feces away. It's like you know you would have wanted to wear shoes because it would have been the ground is not in these kind of higher population centers. Like the ground is not clean, and so there is what you look at is there's this first the ancestral pristine environment that people harken back to as just kind of a time before when humans messed everything up or whatever. They There was this time where you could go and flow through your natural environment, feel things with your feet, connect with the ground, and there's this a safety because there aren't enough people, aren't enough like overlap in order to like have these bacterial issues in the sense. Danger from sharp, unruly, like sharp, unnatural. Unnatural is such a loose word, but you see that there is not a need for something like that unless it's special cases. And then as you get more people together, you're like, well, I don't really want to walk through that. And so just kind of the sense of like there is an actual impulse to want to wear shoes to cover up, to find safety. And so much of our desire for shoes is also wrapped into a desire for cleanliness, a desire for safety, a desire for comfort, a desire for consistency, security. There's this, we don't, we can only handle so much novelty. And if every single step you take has some new thing to pay attention to, it's a lot for your brain to process. And so shoes give stability. And I think that's one thing people don't understand is like when the shoe is comfortable and it feels the same every step, it lets your brain wander elsewhere. And I think there's a reason that in every sacred ritual and the sacred different religious text, when people would encounter sacred ground as part of the ceremony, they take their shoes off to be more mindful of where they're stepping. And so, what you see is that, you know, this is probably a tangent that isn't. Well, I don't know. I think it's valuable. So bear with me for like 2 minutes. But if you could look at the evolution of the human, where we come from this place where there's just this embodied, we are with nature, we are one with nature, we are flowing through, we feel different things. There's less of a central nervous system, not central. There's less of a prefrontal cortex thought around like identity and concepts and future and past and things that kind of take us out of the moment. And so what you notice is that as we start to develop the use of our hands, we have greater calories, our brains can start to think. We have an expansion of our inner world that, in some capacity, hold on, make sure just be mindful if you're not on mute there, otherwise my brain will stop thinking. What you see is you have an expansion of what it means to be human, the internal world. And so we start to think about things like art and beauty and, like purity and
You don't have a round toe.
There you go. See, um, and what you see is as that increases, it becomes more data points. And so we can only manage so many things coming into our brain at any one time. And what you notice is that as we have more stuff in here, we can't, we have to kind of shut out things here. Like you're not paying attention to the clothes you're wearing. You're not paying attention to the way you're sitting and what it feels. We shut off the physical to be internal. And you see this as a desire for more, we want our temperature to be consistent. I want to have a sweatshirt when it's cold. I want to have a light shirt when it's not. I want to have clothes that we want this. We want more and more removal of our physical stimuli so that we can have more of an internal experience. And you see how that becomes a horrible master at some point because we get stuck in anxiety, depression, angst, paranoia, nostalgia. We get stuck in this internal world. And so much of our desire for shoes is a desire to shut down that. Because when you take your shoes off, now you can't think about what you're going to do tomorrow. Because, oh, that hurt my foot. What did I step on? Oh,
This training is for Richmond Brigham.
And so what you want to think about is, can I grab that? Nailed it. Okay. What you want to think about is that shoes in some capacity are valuable as a tool, but there is a trade-off from what we can feel with our body. And so there is a natural impulse to want to cut down on the number of things you could think about. If I could just focus on the hunt because I don't have to think about where I'm stepping, that's a valuable thing. So you sort of see this as a technology, and there's an impulse of I want to have shoes. And so what the problem happens, though, is as technology gives us more use cases with more material, we are able to wear shoes more and more. And what you get is we have inside now. We can be inside, which is a crazy concept to be inside. We have air conditioning, we have heating, we have running water, we have fire we can use to manipulate different aspects. We have clothes, we have soft, comfortable mattresses. So we've gotten so much to the point where we've actually gotten to the opposite of that, where it's actually valuable to restore physical stimulus back to our body so that we are healthy. And so that is, when you look at the conversation around shoes, it is so much more than just, oh, what shoes should I wear? Are my feet healthy? It's like, how do I start to connect back with the sensation of being in a physical body, in a physical world? And I think that's an incredible point to continue to ponder on as we have an increase of AI and different technologies and stuff that want to pull us out of the world and into our, whatever this internal experience is of concepts and thoughts. So just remember, that's where shoes come from. But the point is, the point. I think about this. The words pop into my head, and I just keep thinking about them. The issue is that we have taken the impulse. Okay, this is a hard concept to put in words, but we expanded. Let's just say it this way: we have expanded the use case of something while still bringing in an old perspective on it. Meaning, the last that they make shoes on, which is basically the shape that they build a shoe around, was built for specific use cases that looked a certain way. You're projecting power, you're projecting ceremony. Those things look a certain way. So when you have more use case, you don't do more of something better. Meaning, we used to only make a shoe this way because, you can think of railroad tracks. It was too expensive to make different sizes, so they picked a certain, like, a same size as a chariot. I think it's the same size as the wheelbase as a chariot. Now there's you get like certain things, ratios, aspects, what's standard gets locked in. And then as you have an increased cheapness of material or access because you have new technology, you get an expansion of that. But it doesn't mean that the thing that expanded was better. It just means that they're doing the thing they used to do, but more. And doing it more means that now they have this, what a carryover of a symbol of status and affluence has now been taken into just, oh, this is just what a shoe looks like. But you have to realize that back in the day, it's still today too, but like Roman soldiers, for example, as you got higher up in the ranks of the army, you had higher shoes that were laced around your calf to symbolize more power. The color, the shape, the material you used, every bit of this played into how the shoe, like what the shoe said about you. And the height projects power. So, and it also shapes the calf as the case, it makes the calf look more like muscular, and that's valuable for women. And you start to see different historical things. There's a lot of it has to do with the shoes that women wear, but for better or worse. But you start to see that is like the shape at first was just to infer that the shoe was different and it was something to notice for a ceremonial or I don't know, status symbol. But then that became the shape that they built shoes around. And so what you see is that the shoes come to a point because they look aesthetic, because it looks different, not because it's healthy for the foot. Shoes have a raised heel because it projects power. Shoes come and taper off to keep the foot from sliding forward. So it builds in like that. And so you start to see that in these capacities, you see a stiffer bottom of the shoe. So how do you deal with the fact that the shoe is stiff on the bottom? Well, you curve the bottom of the sole. You have to deal with these aspects. And so what you get is this backing into what is now common, but is completely unnatural for the foot. And you have to understand that that comes from a use case that is not in line with any type of foot function or foot capacity or competition. So it's if you can see it that way, you start to think the entire set of principles that people use to choose shoes is something that that's been inherited over centuries, not necessarily because it's the function of the foot. So it's just important to keep it in mind. I try to minimize my rants. But shoes make a difference because all tissue in your body conforms to the stresses you place on it. The rigid, for example, rigid cast, if you had something that's like if you broke your wrist and you put a cast around it, it would deform the bone, or it would make the bones form. Deform would be take them from the shape they're in and shape them into something that mimics the cast. And so there's no difference between that. And so, this is, as I told you, I wasn't going to do another rant, but this is such a deep thing. We use the shoe to make up for the aspects that we feel we are lacking. I think that's really cool. If you don't feel you're tall, you're going to wear a shoe that's got a thicker sole or a raised heel. Okay, so it makes up for that. If you don't feel you're, good enough or pretty enough, you wear a shoe that has a little more flash in it. And not all the time, but sometimes. It's like if you don't feel that you're shaped enough, you'll have a shoe that will like conform your foot to fit that. So like apparently big fat hobbit feet aren't the thing in terms of aesthetics for walking on the red carpet, but there's so much of this stuff. Use a shoe to make up for the thing. If I don't feel tough, I'm going to wear a shoe that's more of like a working boot. There's something about that I think is really cool. And so the problem is that our feet pay the price, which I think is a beautiful concept of our hands can be what our hands are because our feet take the burden of walking. Like it's such a beautiful thing if you think about the fact that we are human because we can grip things, we can throw, we can use technology. Those things are valuable because they increase the capacity for us to get calories in our brain to expand. But that only happens because our feet are there. But the thing is, we turn and we judge our feet because they're way away from us. We think of our feet as not part of our body. They're the things that touch the ground. You look in the religious text, for example, with Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. Like as an example of like no one would do that because feet are dirty, feet are unclean, feet are unholy. And what was that in the 2004? I think George Bush, HW was doing that at a presentation. Someone threw a shoe at him. Like it's a sign, is if you know, it's a sign of disgust to throw your shoe because a shoe touches the ground. And so, you know, our feet pay the price so that we can be humans. And I think when we lose that because we're just shoving them in shoes, we just need to get rid of them because they're unseen and unclean. There's something that's lost in that. It's kind of sad. But all right, I promise. Then we're waxing philosophically. So let's cover what makes a good shoe. Because if we're going to revisit our assumptions around shoes, then we might as well look and say, what are the new criteria we want to work on? Well, first, just like your fingers are meant to be able to spread and dexterously use and engage with the world, same with your toes. So if you have a shoe that constricts your toes and comes to a point, as they say, then you lose the capacity for that to move. Not only does that cut out circulation, it also cuts out the fact that your brain stops thinking of your toes as toes. So, for example, have you walked around and had your fingers like with a rubber band held together, you would eventually stop developing a sensation for the proprioceptive feedback of the space between your fingers. And even that, you probably, it's an interesting feel. But same thing if you did the foot hand glove at the beginning, there's a loss of that feeling there. So this is why I'm a huge fan of toe box, even if you're wearing conventional, closed toe box shoes. So obviously you bring your toes together because there's more safety. I wear my on the bottom right, there's Vibram 5 fingers. I wear those for almost all my training, and whenever I do jump roping, inevitably the jump rope gets stuck in between my pinky toe, and it's the worst. It's like But what you don't want to be doing, and yeah, I've had issues where I'll kick things, like fractured toes or stuff like that, just because it's their toes. It's like, but there is we could talk about that's a different conversation. But point is, a good shoe has a wide toe box, room for the toes to move, and there's another category of this, but if your toes can move, so but just because, so there's a few things to know. A good shoe has a wide toe box, but there's a difference between foot shaped and wide toe box. A wide toe box just means that it's expanded every size, at least in the United States sizing, every size of the width, because there is length and width sizes like D, a double E, or something like along those lines, but it's a half inch wider. So every size goes up a half inch of diameter. So, but if they keep the same coming to a point, just because it's wider on this midsection doesn't necessarily mean it's not cutting off the pinky toe in this arc. So what you can see here is an example of a shoe that's a wider toe box, but it's still a kind of conventional foot shape. It's not one of these. So this is why I'm a huge fan of toe separated shoes. And I know that for a lot of people, that's not the move. I don't have to tell you. I think it's like once you get over it, there's nothing sexier than seeing all 5 of those toes, separated, because it's like I get a kick out of it. People like think it's crazy you have these gloves, but it's like if you thought about the shoe as you did like a glove, like there's a hand glove and a foot glove, you're like, I want my toes to be able to move. So toe separation is incredibly valuable because it reminds your body that there's digits, so these 5 different spaces that you can work in it, and it not only functions as a functional toe spreader, toe separator, toe spacer, it also starts to give you space to be able to balance, but you can put pressure through individual digits. So this is a Palooza Strand, which I'll come back to. It's my favorite shoe for running. And this is a Vibram 5-finger KSO Evia, which is literally the greatest shoe for lifting of all time. But these are, I think there's a lot of value in toe separated shoes. So to the degree that you're willing to do that, it's a huge benefit for you. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. Number 2, a good shoe has a flat sole. So you have to remember is that when you are barefoot, your feet and your heel are on the same level. They are not like there's no raised heel when you're barefoot. Your heel's flat on the ground. So it's always funny because people wear shoes like, well, is it okay to have zero drop shoes? Like, well, are you ever barefoot? Yes. Then that's what it is. What's weirder is that you would on occasion raise your heel up arbitrarily and think that wouldn't cause issue. What you would get, let's see, there's 2 things, but I'll touch on the Achilles thing, because a lot of times when they have Achilles tendonitis or some type of calf strain, they'll be told by their podiatrist, their doctor, physical therapist, or you name it, or the shoe company that, oh, you got to be careful if you drop down to zero drop shoes because, that's a lot of stress. It's like, whenever somebody says that to me, I always wonder, it's like, well, what do you think it's like when you're barefoot? Actually, ironically, these are the same medical professionals that will tell you to never be barefoot because it's bad for you, which again, it blows my mind how you could even contemplate that. It's like, I don't know, never breathe air outside because it's too much for your lungs. Like, it makes no sense. This is your human state. But the point is, what people will have is in extreme circumstances when they, let's say they're not actually moving their foot through a full range of motion, they're not doing the calf raises we did at the beginning, you'll see a stiffening and shortening of the Achilles, the connective tissue, the Achilles tendon, and all that paratendon fascial tissue on the back of the ankle. And what you'll notice is that it does feel better when you have Achilles tendonitis or any type of stiffness in the calf or the posterior chain to raise the heel, because what that does is shorten the tissue. And so just like all symptom treatment, just like putting a stiffer sole or, like stretching out with a rocker sole does relieve short-term symptoms of this stiffness of the tissue, which fascia is a whole different thing. I think we'll cover in the next week, the next seminar. But what you'll notice is that there's a loss of you get short-term symptom treatment because it feels better, but you lose the ability for that to stretch. And that means that even though it feels better in the short term, you've increased the leverage on the tissue and increases the likelihood that you'll have a much worse injury later on. So what you got to realize is raised heel shoes not only make it, they might be comfortable short term, but they're putting you up for risk long term. More to that, what you notice is this rocker shape that most shoes have, this kind of where the heel comes up at a point, the toe comes up at a point. That's not necessary. That's not an aesthetic thing. They kind of like make it look cool, whatever, but that's a necessity because as the soles get stiffer and thicker, they become impossible to bend. So if this were actually flat on the ground, you would not be able to walk. And the problem is, though, that just like we said at the beginning, we're doing those calf raises. You feel a difference when you do 30 or 40 calf raises. It's tough, and you realize how weak your calves are because most people roll through the heel to the toe, and they don't actually push off. They don't engage their feet. And so this is the problem of walking poorly, meaning walking poorly, meaning walking by relying on shoes as technology, is you roll through these tissues, and you never actually develop the muscle. You never actually develop the foot or the capacity to push off. And when you do this, what you end up doing is you can go for this is where people go for like 10,000 steps a day. They walk all the time. They walk. Like, oh, why does my back hurt all the time at the end of the day? My hamstring, my feet hurt. Well, it's because you're not actually using your feet to walk. You're rolling through. And it's even worse if you have a heavier shoe that's not rock, because it's like the stiffness of the sole prevents your foot from actually getting motion and hydration to the tissue. And so you're, in a sense, you're not letting the little guys, little tissues and muscles help out. You're using the big ones, and then that's where you get stiff, and that stiffness reverberates up the system of your posterior chain. So, when you see these rocker shoes, just understand that they're doing the work for you of rolling through, but by doing the work for you, you are losing some capacity of your foot. Part 3. A good shoe has a flexible midsole, which just means it lets your foot move. If you cut out the the millions of small little micro steps and adjustments you would make by having to take a million steps, you're going to have a very different foot. So if I take a million steps in a super flexible shoe versus a million steps, probably barefoot would be a better option. But let's just say a super flexible shoe, like a Vibram or a Palouvre or something. Like a Shama set. We'll cover all these later. But like a Vibram 5-finger, if I take a million steps there versus a million steps in something like, I don't know, a Nike Alpha Fly or, whatever, one of those like super padded shoes, a Hoka, for example, the worst. Your feet will be fundamentally different at the end of that million steps. And so the flexible midsole allows that you bend, you don't break. You make the little small adjustments so that you don't get stiff. But also remember that stiffness of the sole is context dependent. If you're walking and you need a steel toe shoe, or you're walking around with nails and stuff like that, yeah, you're going to want a stiff shoe. If you're doing a competition and you're running a marathon and you want one of those super shoes with a carbon fiber plate, yeah, you want a stiffer shoe. If you're playing a sport like you want a cleat or something like that, you need to grip the ground, or ice skating or snowboarding, you want a stiffer shoe. But you have to understand that the cost of that is something you have to navigate afterwards, and long-term use of that does have changes to the foot, but it's part of being a human. We're not supposed to get out of this thing, without scars, but we'll cover that later. You do have to do work afterwards. If you're wearing stiff shoes, understand it will take some time to do some stretching at the end of the day. It's really valuable, and that's when you want to prioritize in your normal schedule. And number 4, a good shoe has thin-ish soles. So thin-ish. This is the thing I've changed my mind on the most in the 3, 4, 5 years I've been doing this kind of like online coaching, really talking about this stuff, trying to educate. I used to be much more the hard line. It's only minimalist. You should be barefoot and minimalist all the time. But then I learned about electricity and physics a little bit more. So what happens when you touch the ground? So the reason your feet have sweat glands, one of the big reasons, and the reason your feet will get kind of moist, is because we are used to touching the ground. Now, well, this is we'll do another seminar on this concept of grounding because it's a fascinating thing, but it's also the importance of understanding yourself as an electric water balloon that transmits stuff. But you can get electrocuted, and the ground functions as almost unlimited source of electrons, excess electrons, both by solar flares from the sun, lightning strikes from potential differences in the atmosphere. We use electrical gradients, which is basically the stuff of acids, to adjust and to clean our body. So reactive oxygen species, which you've ever heard of, that's what antioxidants are for. Antioxidants are a thing. I don't mean to, quotation around it, but that's what antioxidants are for. But what that does is it exchanges oxidation is removing electron, reducing is gaining electron. And so, sorry, oxidation and reduction are the two different aspects of chemistry where you gain or you lose an electron. So when we touch the ground, we have an exchange of electrons. That's what the point of the spike lands and the high moisture of your feet to be able to increase that capacity. So anything you put between your feet and the ground that isn't an organic transmittable surface, it impedes this grounding process. And so what happens is you think you're doing all this minimalist stuff, you're walking around, but if you're wearing shoes that have rubber on the bottom or plastic, you're not getting any grounding anyway. So, if you want to wear shoes that are super minimalist, like a zero or a finger, 5 finger, stuff like that, it's a preference thing. If but the reality is it's uncomfortable to walk on gravel when you're wearing a minimalist shoe. It sucks. I've done sprints in my 5 fingers before. I remember this one time I was doing hill sprints up a driveway, and I stepped on a rock and got a nice little bruise on the bottom of my foot and hurt for about a week. And so those are the trade-offs. It's like you kind of get stuck, especially if you're running on hard surfaces. So the problem is if you get too much cushion, the higher the cushion is, the higher likelihood of ankle sprains. So my ideal is for especially distance hard surface running, I keep it under 24 millimeters. So that's an example of the Ultra Escalante here. This is a 22 millimeter stack height, I believe. 2.5 centimeters is an inch. So that's 25 millimeters is an inch. So, under an inch basically. And that's going to give you for almost all mid or long distance running. So it's going to be a great way to kind of think about that stuff. So just kind of use that as a perspective. But underneath that, everything else is a preference. We'll talk about use cases, but I do like to feel the ground. You do increase the ground feel, and there is value in that. But understand that if you're wearing a typical, I don't personally, I'm not a huge fan of Zero or Vivos or that minimalist style. We'll come back to this because I think the minimalist is the next. And we'll come back to that in a second. But look at that animation I had there. The difference between the cushion is that this is a very different, having 24 millimeters or less of a flexible, wide, and flat shoe is very different than what you see in the modern running shoe today, which is these companies make money by telling you that you can skip the strength, you can skip the body weight, you can skip the fat loss, you can skip the running form, you can skip the buildup, you can skip all these things and just get the right shoe. Get the right shoe, get it, and then buy the new one in 300 miles when it wears out and you have the new one. And there's this constant thing of design obsolescence, and you have this marketing thing where they have to tell you come back and do the next thing. But you notice the commonalities of these: very thick shoes, raised heel, toe rocker shape, and then especially as you get some of the more competition shoes, you're gonna get the carbon fiber plate, you're gonna get all these things. And yes, they spend millions of dollars on finding foam that increases the rebound, because otherwise, if you were to put just general ethylene vinyl acetate foam, which is EVA, which is the typical foam that most shoes have, if you put that under your shoe, you're going to lose a lot because it's just like punching into a pillow as opposed to punching with just bare knuckles. It's a very different feel. You're getting a lot less. You're absorbing less force, but you're also producing. You're losing force in this kind of like dispersion with into the foam. So you got to understand that when you look at the conventional shoe, they're all the same. There might be some differences in the color or the type of fabric they use or the type of foam they use, but generally they're raised heel, narrow toe box, stiff, and extra cushioned, extra maxed cushion. So they're all the same, and it's unfortunate because they tell you the lie that you don't. There's all you need is the right shoe, and that's why running injuries continue to go up because the conversation about running injuries, because it does take a long time to develop the capacity to run like a human. And this is a shortcut to that, but these will only, they end up, there's a loss long term of your capacity to feel your body and to have other aspects that are developed. And the different and the unique aspect is that there's an irony in this marketing, because when you see people that wear Hokas, there's a reason you have that much padding. If you're running and using the actual foot, ankle, lower leg complex of your foot to absorb force, you don't need all that padding. This is what real running looks like for a lot of people. They're unhappy. They're overstriding. They're landing the heel. It's miserable. It's painful. It's not a fun place to be. This is what they show you. Oh, she's accelerating. She's turning the corner. She's on her forefoot. Like it's not attractive to show this. But this is what the shoe is built for, and it allows this. But you can imagine that the pain and impact of this heel, the shoe going all the way through the heel, that's not fun for your body to absorb. So just keep in mind that what you see is not what they are, what the use case is. And the hard part is that if you run like this, you will have this is plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, shin splints, knee pain, hip pain, stenosis of the spine. All those things will, that's just it's inevitable for you. And so just understand when you see these things, it's like, the companies are trying to sell you on a dream, not necessarily on what it actually is like. And you got to be careful. If you buy that, you're really just buying the marketing. And if you buy the marketing, you're going to be left in this, which is not knowing how to use the thing you bought, but having bought it. And you'll be worse off long term. So you might ask, what are the alternatives? What are good running shoes? Well, for marathons or less, I'll say it this way. Before you ask what the running shoe is, you should figure out, do I have the strength to run? There's a whole process of being able to actually develop the capacity to run. That's, can you move your feet? Can you run? Can you stride, which is, can you maintain ideal form for a short distance? Can you jump? Do you have the ability to develop and absorb force with your body? Those things are valuable. So, what you want to think about is that your capacity to run well will dictate the shoes you have. The better of a runner you are, the more access to different shoes you have. You can run correctly in all shoes, but if you skip the part of learning to run correctly and just have the shoe, then you get limited to just that shoe. And that's why people can only wear a certain pair of shoes that have a certain stack height, and that's where you get into issues. So the other thing to remember is that most of the thing when you look at these like super padded shoes, a lot of that comes from the ultra marathoner. So what you got to realize is ultra marathon is like glorified walking. It's, by the time you're getting to 50, 100, 150, 200 miles, like unless you're at the top level, like Zach Bitter and some of these guys that are just crazy, that are like running those in 6-minute mile paces, and just, I don't know how they do it, but it's unbelievably powerful. Like they were doing for hours and hours on this like high level running. Unless you're that person, the vast majority of people are just kind of walking. And so in that capacity, you're just trying to see how long your body can physically last. That's not healthy. It's just competition. But you want to remember that, like there's a benefit to competition shoes, but they also have a cost. And the thing is, if you're relying on at first ultramarathoners had stiffer shoes, but you notice that they started to creep down to shorter distances. So marathons got stiffer or thicker shoes, then half marathons and 5Ks. And so now you see this kind of like increase of this stiffness or the thickness of the sole, which is a sport specific shoe that's creeping down into lower capacities. And so in that capacity, what you want to think about is there is a cost to this. And so if you flip it around and go the other way, develop your capacity to run first, then you can think, okay, I can use the benefit of these shoes, but I'm not relying on them because my running form is conserved distances. So short distances, they're fine. This is where you want to think about practicing the art of running. You maximum feedback. So you could do 5 on 5 fingers, Shama sandals, something, or barefoot for very short distances. For most people, they don't have the capacity to strength to increase the distance there. But what you get is that's your chance to learn. And when you practice that, you go to a track and you practice this with a lot of feedback, you really get to feel how it is to run well. Then you develop the strength and you earn your distance. And so my perspective is these are the Paluvas right here on the outside. These are the 5 fingers. I'm a huge fan. The shoes I wear, the Ultra Escalante and the Paluva, those are the 2 shoes I wear for running distance, long distance on really any surface. It's just, at that point, I'm not out there, like I'm just going out for different reasons, and it's preference. At some point, like I don't have too high. The cushion is minimal. It's the shoe's flat. It's flexible. But I'm not getting the grounding impact. So there's nothing lost, necessarily, because the surfaces are running on through college campuses or different streets and stuff like that. It's just I don't want to have to think about where I'm stepping. I'm just going. But if I want to think about where I'm stepping, that means I'm focused on the art of running. And so there are use cases, and it's a preference thing. At some point, people like different aspects, but just keep that in mind, is that like your running shoe is contingent upon your goal and your pace. If you're going to be doing competition and racing, then the super shoes, and you can't beat those. I mean, let's see, the carbon fiber plate, but we'll come back to that. There's another slide on that. the question of should you go minimalist, I mean, ultimately, and this is not a fulfilling answer, but it is a preference. So you do feel the ground better, but if you but the thing to remember is that if your ground is entirely flat, like I'm feeling the flat tile of the mall or the grocery store or the carpet in my house, like there's no ground to feel there. It's all the same. It's all flat. It's just there's no texture. There's no difference. And so you might feel the ground better, but like doesn't matter if the ground you're on has no feedback, no difference, no elevation, no contact. And I think that's what people lose. And so you know if you well, I'll say I think minimalist shoes matter a lot more if you're out and like outside in nature and you're feeling the ground and walking because it gives you a lot more embodied grounded feel. And for training, I think it's incredibly valuable. Like the 5 fingers, the ultimate shoe for lifting and training in the gym. It's just remembering that like you don't have to be dogmatic about it or hard nosed about it. If you want to go and run and on the cement and you're on like the side of the road or the sidewalk for 5, 6, 8 miles, there is no context. There's no texture there. There's nothing you're gonna feel. So having a little bit of padding, you don't. It's not like you lose the feel. You're going to have the same feedback because it would be flat one way and flat the other way. It's not different. I will say if you do go minimalist, get quality. The cheap minimalist shoes fall apart so fast. I say apparently the Whiten, the WHITIN, is like a cheap Amazon brand that seems to last pretty well. But I remember when I first got into minimalist shoes, I would buy these like $20 shoes with like Tesla. Like I don't know why that was the brand, but it was like Tesla shoes, and they would last 2 months if I put duct tape on the bottom of them, and it was horrible. But I bought like 6 pairs a year, and it was like I should just buy those. But I have my 5 fingers, and they've lasted me years. And same for my Vivos and other aspects. So if you buy them, get quality because they have warranties if they fall apart, but they definitely last longer. That's been the experience I found. Let's see. One thing to notice is that when you look at the general trend of shoes, and I think even the minimalist shoes companies do this too, is there's a design obsolescence of sorts. It's not as bad with minimalist shoes because they're generally based around more sustainability and like function of the feet, and so your feet last. The shoes tend to wear differently when you don't have a lot of padding underneath them, but new is not necessarily better. It's just slightly different. And you'll notice that there's many pair of shoes like these Nike Recons are, I think, what they call them. The first pair of Recons were great. Take the insole out; it's actually a pretty solid shoe. But by the time you get to the sixth, seventh, eighth version, they're horrible. They're stiff. They've got this weird thing that makes the midsole unflexible. The raised heel is there. You can't take out the competition sole. So shoes, companies are trying to make more money. There's design obsolescence. So if you find a pair of shoes you like, get a few pairs because odds are that shoe won't be in that same style. And even some of the companies that are more foot friendly are kind of falling prey to this as well. So it's tough because it's making more money. Now, this is an important topic because a lot of people ask, what about sport specific shoes? Meaning like you got climbing shoes over here, you got cleats for different, like football cleats over here, but soccer cleats, cross cleats, oh man, that make a difference. Cycling shoes, ice skating, and then snowboarding, all these shoes. What are you supposed to do when the shoe you wear for your sport isn't loving your foot? Now, first thing to understand is a competition is not healthy. Like there is no such thing as healthy competition other than the way that phrase. It's healthy competition. It's like kind of. There's things that you develop from competition that are good for your mind and your being. But the competition itself doesn't you're pushing your body to the limits and you're probably going to end up pushing past some capacity. You will end up, straining some aspects, but that's not the point of life isn't to make it through without scars. It's to challenge yourself and develop. So understand that there's a trade-off between task and tissue. A lot of times people get into the foot and the shoe thing because their feet are hurting or they don't feel good or they feel injured. And it's like, I'm going to take care of my body. And so they kind of go down this thing of, I'm going to honor my tissue. I'm going to rehabilitate. I'm going to get, and so they kind of get allergic to things that otherwise just kind of put your body into hard situations. Some people really go the full length and get into barefoot running. They want to go and see how far they can push, and then that's cool and all. But oftentimes the point is not to remove technology completely; it's to learn to work with it. And so when you're going and you're doing something like rock climbing or cycling, you got to realize that these are small markets, relatively speaking, and the companies that have a foothold, pun intended, they're not going to like spend the money to change because there's a certain style, there's a certain thing that works, there's a certain belief set that the people that use it have, and generally they're not thinking about their feet. So unless there's a new company that starts, there's not going to be much change in these for a while. And I think that's one of those things that people are like, oh, hopefully they'll make this kind of, but there's not a lot of, there is money to be made, but if you're making a product that is like climbing shoes that are foot friendly, you now have to change the way that people climb because everyone that's gotten used to climbing this, I mean, in this style of shoe has to try something different. So there's a whole lot of barriers that isn't just about foot health. And so oftentimes it's better just to understand that you have to do the work afterwards if you're going to keep your feet healthy, and you can't necessarily wait for some savior of a shoe to show up and make your life easier, because it probably isn't going to happen in the time being. But the good thing is your feet will bounce back and they are healthy. So even if you have to wear a shoe for an hour or, or 2 or 3 any given day to be able to like do a thing, being barefoot and maximizing your foot health outside of that can go a long way in making up for that. So just remember that there is no perfect scenario. There are trade-offs, but if you're trying to compete and push your body in some capacities, remember the feet are here to serve, and it's a beautiful thing. So, don't miss out on the point of what's available to you just because you have something isn't optimal. I think that's a hard thing to do. A note about slides and flip-flops. If it does not have a heel strap, your foot is altering its position to hold the shoe on. That's the same for slides, for flip-flops that go in between your big toe, Crocs without the sport mode strap on. You need the heel strap because that allows your foot to relax and move. Every single step you take, your foot naturally opens up and splays as you grab the ground. You feel that. And so if you have to hold the foot down, imagine that you have a credit card between your finger and you have to hold that credit card while you're trying to use your hand. Now, I can't actually really open it because I have to hold this credit card in between my fingers. And so that's going to throw off your ability to use the dexterity of your toes to feel and balance, to move. And so from a perspective, it just stiffens the tissue in the bottom of your foot and the back of your lower leg. So when it comes to sandals, Shaman sandals, the best. I have a picture of them later on, or earlier on. They're phenomenal. But those anybody, they're Zero, they're Lumas or whatever. There's a bunch of companies that have that. But this is a picture of the Hirachi style. Like these are the Tarahumara. They're from Born to Run. The people in that the tribe in that book. This is the style. They have a piece of rubber on the bottom. They just strap it around the ankle, and these people run for miles and miles and miles. And that's definitely on axis for you. So last points are what I wear. So for distance running, Palooza Strands Ultra Escalante Racer. Notice there's a difference between the Escalante and the Escalante Racer. I do not like Escalante. I love the Racer. Those I run for all I carry in my car. That's my distance go-to for everything. I love the Palooza. Like that's been my new favorite. It's great. If you don't love the toe separated thing, it might not be for you, but it's really comfortable once you get a pair and start to move in them. For sandals every day, again, Shamas, the Numas are great because they're elastic band. Huge fan of those. Absolutely love them. For gym, training, and life, I walk around. I always carry my backpack with me. I have my 5 fingers and my Shamas. And if I'm wearing my 5 fingers, my Shamas are in the backpack. If I'm wearing my Shamas, my 5 fingers are in the backpack. I never leave home without those. They're just always with me. But for the gym, the ultimate training shoe in any gym setting is the Vibram 5 finger. I like the KSO EVO. It's like a work glove for your foot. It is amazing, and you get such better training stimulus for your feet by wearing those. It's unparalleled. Unparalleled. People that know wear those. And then for going out, these white shoes here, they're a really good looking shoe. As a buddy of mine started this company and just did really well. Well, he became a buddy of mine after he started the shoe company, but it's such is life. But the Icarus Ascend, I like them. They look good. They're leather. They're really nice. They're foot friendly. They're nice. They're good for going out. And then my Vivo, I gotta say, I don't love the way Vivo barefoot shoes feel, but for hiking and for like the aesthetic, they nailed it. So they are a really good shoe that I have a pair of all black that I wear if I'm traveling and need to look nice going out somewhere. But that's pretty much all I wear. Honorable mentions, a lot of people will bring up and ask about Flux shoes. So that's this shoe over here on the right. Some people love them. I got a friend who got a pair and she loves them. I just think it's way too much padding. I've got another friend that had them, and she said that they were a lot stiffer than the Ultra Solstice or Escalante, one of those two. I don't love the fact that they have this toe rock, which stiffens the shoe. I think, but they're generally wide in the toe box. People like the way they look. They're flat. They're zero drop. So there's trade-offs. It's a step up. If you're looking for a shoe that'll get you moving in the right direction, I wouldn't be mad if you wore those, obviously, but it's like it wouldn't be my go-to. But to each their own. People like the way the shoes look, apparently. So, they're kind of like a B. I'll give them a B. I would never wear them, but some people love them. Other people are like, yeah. But they're better than others. I'll just say that. The Ultra brand is important to talk about. Generally, Ultra is a great company. I really like them, but they have in the last few years the ownership has changed and they're shifting the language they use. They're not always zero drop. They're not always, like now they're getting higher and higher. You're starting to see some of these things. They're chasing kind of the market of like the ultra running and the competitive shoe, which I get it. They're competition shoes, and that's fine. But just notice that not all shoes, just because it's an ultra, doesn't mean it's ideal. So people are like, oh, I got ultras. It's like, The only two ultras that I like and really recommend are the Solstice and the Escalante Racer. Those are under 24 millimeter stack height. They're wide, flexible, and flat. They're great. Those are the only two I trust. The others, I've had people like, the shoe's changing, and I don't necessarily think that the changing for the best. So just keep in mind that just because a brand has a shoe or two that's good doesn't mean the whole brand is something that you can trust out of hand. It's just a note there. When it comes to sports shoes, New Balance has great wide options. So they actually are one of the few companies that will do both a wide and like do the length and the width option. So there's soccer, there's lacrosse, I think there's football cleats, American football cleats. Um, so New Balance is a good option for like a pretty broadly available shoe cleat option, as well as shoe options. For a lot of cases, they have a wider option. So I think that's good to note. Again, remember there's a difference between wide toe box and foot shaped, but you take wins when you can get them. Vivo Barefoot I think is the best for hiking. I love. I mean, I do almost all my hiking my 5 finger KSOs, but a lot of people don't like them, and it's not comfortable per se. But I just like the way I'm really gripping the ground. So I would say between 5 fingers and Vivos, those are nailed it with the hiking. And then toe socks for life. You just got to be toe socks. The best, ironically, the best pair I found is these super cheap ones on Amazon called VWell. Toe socks for life. Even if you're wearing conventional closed shoes, the act of putting the toe sock on and having to put your fingers through your toes, just doing that once or twice a day is so valuable. So toe socks for life, cuts down the blisters, it increases the dexterity of your shoes or your feet. It's fantastic. Toe socks for life. And the last thing, best resource if you want to look at different shoes. She does a little bit. There's another friend of mine, Sean, who does Barefoot shoe review. I think it's his thing. Um, but Anya's reviews, she's and connects with like manufacturers in Europe, so she's got different warehouses. She's phenomenal. She's like the Barefoot shoe queen. She just knows all these different. Her website is so thorough for like the best work boots, the best for kids, the best for fashion, the best for we've done articles together on different things like cleats and running shoes and stuff. So Anya's reviews, ANYAS reviews. She's great. Her website will just walk you through every single option, and there's a lot of discounts and stuff there. So I think that's it.